Okay, well, good evening. The case number 3 for EMIS 8356 at SM, and here we go. So as this is case 3, and this is the follow-up to case 1 and case 2, both with MyTech and DBC concepts, what we're going to see is that MTI is a combination of the two existing entities, MyTech and DBC concepts. Two, the companies were funded, and these companies were merged through M&A and acquisition, and this was funded by an infusion of capital by both Summit Capital companies, $125 million. The combined entity has a yearly revenue projected to be $365 million US. Its current headquarters is located in Chicago, but does have worldwide operations in US, Ireland, the United Kingdom, India, and China. With an IT headcount of 75 personnel, the majority of which are based in the US, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. MTI's current forecasted IT budget is about 15.6 million, and that's about 4.2% of total revenue. MTI has standardized across all the locations on leading hardware such as Sun Oracle, Cisco, Salesforce.com, HP, and Microsoft. There's about a 15 to 20% growth for MTI in their North America market, a 10% growth in their China market, and low single-digit growth both in the UK market over the next 2 to 3 years. MTI is hoping that by bettering their financial position, they'll be able to pay down some of their debt holders and then be ready to buy another company in 3 to 4 years. So our findings have been is that based on the 365 million in annual revenue, SGA for IT is forecasted about 4.2% total revenue. This is above industry best practice. We would like to see that lower, probably in the 3.4 to 3.5 range. Two large cost drivers for MTI in the IT department are the staff and hardware. Take those two together, that constitutes about 70% of the IT spend. When you look at headcount, currently there are 75 staff members, and out of 745 total staff company, that's about 10% of the workforce. This looks pretty. The organizational structure, which we'll look at here in a minute, is very straightforward, and right now it meets the company. Even though it is a big cost driver, since it is a cost driver, it's actually about $5.15 million per year. So when you divide that out by the 75 employees, that actually gives you a blended cost per employee of about almost $69,000 per. So we actually have to do a blended rate for that. Obviously, some staff members do cost more than others. The CIO is going to be better compensated than a help desk associate, but we weren't given enough information to actually project that out over the 5.15 million. So we're going with a blended cost here. The other cost driver, heavy legacy costs. DB Concepts, one half of the merger, had a adoption of one hardware and software vendors that has a significant cost requirement to it, and we're seeing that continue on. This is the first year of this new entity, and we're still seeing some very heavy hardware software costs that we're going to have to pay out through depreciation over the next few years. The remainder of the budgetary items do appear to be in line with industry standards. And what we're really looking at is that MTI will have the ability to decentralize some of its IT workforce through some of its existing facilities and take advantage of a lower cost staffing model with no increasing cost to anything ancillary such as rent, telecom, travel, or any of those other line items. The existing org chart, we've mentioned this in the last slide, is very straightforward. At the top organization, you have the CIO, and attached to him, you have five administrative staff members. These include 3 admins and then 2 managers, 1 for telecom and 1 for vendor management. The rest of the staff is actually broken up into 4 silos: application, operations, desktop, or security. So you can see on applications, we have 10 developers, 6 QA staff, and 4 broken out into either architects or the PM team. In ops, we have 4 network associates, 6 server administrators, and 8 application associates. Desktop, 16 FT, and down at the house, we have another 10 staff. For security, we still have a large security organization. Mentioned in our project too that this may be a opportunity for outsourcing or a opportunity to just cut because of the size of this company and the value that they had actually placed on security, or the overvalue really of what they had done. But we still do have one CSO, Chief Security Officer, and we do have 4 engineers backing him up. Taking a look at this again, this is 75 employees. The vast majority of these employees are based out of the US. We do have one of the desktop associates in each of the sales offices in the UK, Ireland, uh, China, and India. We also have a few additional desktop and server administration in the China manufacturing facility. So let's take a look. Evaluating any type of relocation. We're going to be using the MTI facilities that are already in existence, because that has a no increase for us in rent and occupancy, and we already do have a footprint in that country. So we'll take a look at the 4 countries outside the US that actually do have MTI facilities already there. We'll start out with China. The merits of China is it has the lowest cost of all 4 locations. There is a large, a well-educated labor pool. It has the largest presence inside the U.S. today for MTI, as they're already the help desk and server support administrators are located in that factory. What are the risks? Language barrier. Really, the language is very different from business English. Where with MTI based out of the U.S., that's where, and the majority of their sales coming out, that's where a lot of customers are going to be. We do have indifferent government support. Really, at this time, we due to the location of China, their time zone doesn't match up well with the US, which it would be supporting. Going on to India. India does have the second lowest labor cost. It has a large, well-educated labor pool. It has a low language barrier, as English may not be the primary language, but it is a secondary language taught across India in schools there, as it was a former British colony. And some of the risks there: poor time and distance again, about halfway around the world from the US. And the infrastructure is really not up to Western par. There are intermittent power outages in some of the cities, and transportation can be a nightmare with the large population growth in typical IT cities such as Bangalore or Chennai. Moving on to Ireland. Ireland, some of the merits are it has a low language barrier. They do speak English. They do have a highly skilled workforce, and they have a good history of quality in what they do. The risks of moving staff there, it actually is a basically an equivalent cost, and because of that, there really isn't much need to do that. Also, it has a very low labor pool. Ireland's not a very populous country. There is, and for good workers, there is a it's difficult to acquire good work with that low number of workers in the pool. Moving on, okay, again, it has a language barrier. They did invent the English language. They have a highly skilled force, history, quality, and they do have a large labor force available to them. The risk there actually is that it's high cost. It actually costs more to do business in the UK, and there are other costs as well that we're not seeing from a dollar amount. More holidays, EU, more closely aligned with the EU schedule than that of the US. So how can we actually mitigate each of these? Well, going back to China, China actually is a good place to evaluate for non-customer facing positions. Those engineering or developer positions that are not having to speak either to internal customers or external customers, because they can communicate well still either over email or through just working with some of the same teams over and over again. So we could really look at them for a second shift staff positions, because they are about 10 hours behind us here in Central Standard Time. And they could also be a good candidate for non-time sensitive positions, for things that are not time sensitive, such as if you have a developer working in the US, you could then hand off to a developer in China, as long as they're not, and continue that work on. In India, the poor time distance could actually be mitigated by multiple shifts. India does have a history of supporting the US either in call centers or in support models. So there actually is a very large pool of people willing to work that kind of later shift in their time zone. Facilities could be outfitted that we already have out there with redundancy for power and network that can take care of some of those infrastructure problems that we have. And then we could make sure that we can keep the systems running, connectivity back to all the rest of the countries that we're doing work with. In Ireland, really the only thing we can do for mitigation is to pay above market rates to secure some top talent there. Since it already is an equivalent cost to the U.S., that doesn't look very appetizing. We're already spending uh, more. That means we would be paying more than what we'd be supporting in the U.S. And looking at the UK, the mitigation would be really we could just keep staff to a minimum. That cost is going to be above the US. The time isn't the best, where we could get a better quality and or a better price and better time zone difference by just staffing people in the US. Well, if we take a look at this in our 2x2 matrix, what we actually have here is we're going to compare quality versus cost. And the size of the marker in there, you'll see is actually going to represent the size of the labor pool. So taking a look at China, it has a low cost, but it also sits in the lower quality. We're going to define quality as the perceived quality of work by the rest of the company, any language barriers that we would have, and the difference in time zone. Really, um, we do have, you know, for quality, we do have all those marks against them. Quality of work considered less than some of the other countries. Language highest out of all the countries that we have, and the time zone isn't very good for in business hours here in the U.S. But it does have the lowest cost. So you're actually going to see the low quality, low cost, and that doesn't mean that we can't use it for some things, but we just need to be careful in order to provide for the business. Moving on to India. India has a perceived higher quality value. It is slightly more expensive and a very large labor pool. That's we're going to see that larger circle than the one there in China. Moving into Ireland, high quality, high cost. That's the quadrant it's going to be sitting in, as it is an equivalent cost to the U.S. Still high cost, really no cost savings there, but its quality is very good. It's on par with the rest of the Western world. Unfortunately, they do have a low labor pool. That's where you're going to see it reflected with that smaller circle there. And lastly, we have the UK, highest cost, highest quality that we can come up with, or that we can shift work to. Again, it is also has a large labor pool that we can pull from. So that's why you're going to see that larger circle. But combine all those, high quality, no language barrier. Time zone isn't the worst, and that's going to relegate it to a much higher cost model for us. So what are we really looking at? What we're going to do is recommend a mixed IT staff model across all the MTI sites in order to increase coverage, more of that follow the sun, while reining in our cost. So look, our existing, we have almost all of our associates in the US. We have only 6 associates in China and 1 each in Ireland and the UK. What we can do is we can migrate some specific jobs to facilities with a lower cost of living, and then that frees up funds that we can then go and pay back our investors with. Also, dispersing staff across the globe will allow for a follow the sun model. Now that we are a globalized company, we do need to provide support for a much larger part of the day than we would have as when we were MyTech and we're just based in the US. Really what we're going to do is we're going to take non-customer facing positions, and these would be positions such as security or application development or QA, and we're going to move those to areas with low cost but things like high language barriers. Good example of that, again, would be we could move our QA. As you can see, we've moved our QA testing environment, or QA testing team into China. They can work, doesn't have to be in sync with it doesn't have to be in real time with the developers, but it needs to be close. Developers can develop things in whatever region they're at, send it off to the China team, and then they can do their work through their regular shift, pass it back along, including notes or written instructions or things like that. This also does help because non-time sensitive positions can be moved to basically the areas with the lowest cost but poor time difference. Really what we're seeing here is we're going to be moving a large section of our staff to China, has a low model but poor language and time zone, but they're appropriate for things like security, application development, and QA. India is another interesting candidate. It does have a low cost, but has a great language skills in that US is taught widely in that country. And those would be appropriate for anything such as help desk. We can move our vendor manager there, and we can use our IT manager for our telecom. And what that's going to do is it's going to free up some funding. Actually, is going to situate that some of the staff members kind of in a point. It isn't the earliest part of the day when the U.S. comes in, but it isn't the latest part of the day. When, or really the earliest part of the next day when our European staff comes in. So actually a good middle time zone to support multiple reasons. So we are going to have to keep some of the in the U.S. Some of the higher level positions we do to support the U.S. offices and the headquarters, and the desktop actually one department that actually isn't going to change. We want to make sure that we're keeping those desktop associates in these facilities. So last thing to note is that we can actually move the entire help desk from the US to India. India, again, has that history of having a kind of round-the-clock help desk for English language speaking countries, and that's very common over there, very easy to get quality staff to fill those time slots that would be considered second or third shift here in the US. So taking a look at it, MTI is actually well positioned to take advantage of existing and in order to provide greater coverage and lowering their IT staffing costs. If you look at the existing, we have revenue at $365 million, cost of goods sold 291, giving us a gross profit of 20.22, which is very healthy. In the existing model, we had an SGA just for IT of about $15.6 million. This comes out to 4.2% of total revenue, which again is still too high. Like we mentioned earlier, we want to get that down into the low threes if we can. By making changes, and what you'll see is there's an included spreadsheet. We can actually lower that percentage of revenue. We can lower that IT spend to just a shade under $14 million, and we can get that revenue spend down to about 3.8. Through moving those positions, we're actually able to lower our IT spend just in staffing from 5.15 million down to 3.55 million. This is a reduction of 31%. This is not cutting any positions. This is not lowering any. This isn't reducing the amount of work that we can do. This is just by moving our staff around the globe to take advantage of those lower cost areas of the globe. With that cut in costs, we're going to lower our total IT budget from 15.6 million to about 13.9 million. This is a reduction of 11%. As we had seen earlier, since IT is one of the two largest cost drivers, being able to drive cost efficiencies in this area is going to provide the most bang for our buck versus trying to make cuts in some of our lower spend areas. With these changes, we can actually push an additional $1.7 million to be reallocated for repayment of debt holders. So that's going to be a significant add, as it's really been a driver for the CIO and the CFO that we want to be able to pay down this debt in order to be in a good position to purchase and continue to purchase other companies and work on these M&A agreements we're getting into. Percentage of revenue, IT revenue spend, as I mentioned earlier, does drop from 4.2 to 3.8. This is more in line with industry standards, probably the best that we can do with the IT staff. We still are hampered by some significant spending in hardware that we're just going to have to work off the books through a depreciation cycle. Some of the ancillary benefits is that IT support is now global. We're able to support our global workforce, and we're able to do work as I mentioned earlier, as a follow the sun line. We were able to mitigate for time zone, language, and skill set by putting in place a balanced cost model where we're going to take a look at in support of the business versus what it is going to cost us to actually provide those services. So in closing, MTI is actually in a very good position to leverage existing facilities in order to stand up a new support structure for its worldwide operations. Projected costs for IT staffing can be lowered from 5.15 million to 3.55 million US, and this is a reduction of 31%. Total IT budget will be lowered from 15.6 million to 13.9 million, and this reduction of 11%. An additional 1.7 million US can be reallocated to repayment of the debt that we had to take on when we combined companies earlier. And our percentage of revenue spent in IT is lowered from 4.2% to 3.8%, which is more in line with industry standards. So my notes and assumptions page, as you can see from the documents I provided. You can also see that I did insert the Excel spreadsheet where you'll see all my financial calculations and how I came up with that. So I want to thank you for watching my video and hope you have a great evening. Thank you.